Okay, so in this video we're gonna talk about loops. And what a loop is in JavaScript is a way to basically run a block of code over and over and over again, multiple times, based on certain conditions. And this can be useful, for example, when we want to iterate over something, either an array or an object or a primary data type such as a string or whatever this can be. And in previous videos of this course, we've touched upon iterations over array during array methods such as for each and map. And a loop is very similar in this regard, that we basically iterate over something and do it multiple times. But the thing with a loop is that it's not bound to arrays. It can basically be based on anything. It basically differs in the way that we set a condition to run something multiple times, run a block of code multiple times, and this doesn't have to. This condition hasn't had to be the length of an array, for example. And there are a couple of different types of loops, and one of the most common ones that we bump into JavaScript programs is the for loop. And the for loop we presented in an earlier video where we touched upon how we could use it to check the IDs of every object in an array. And we will use it for arrays in this video too. And I think that the best thing for us to do is just to start writing some code. So the first thing I will do is that I will create a new array that I will call const cars for a loop. And this array I will set equal to an array of objects with cars in it. So the first property of each object will be a name, and first one will be a BMW. And then each car will also have a model to it. So model, and we can here write 320D. And the next car in this array will be Volvo, and will be of the model XC60. So here we have a cars array that we call cars for a loop. And now we're going to use basically the for loop to basically just console.log out the name of the cars in this array. And the way I write the for loop is that I write for, and then I set up the condition container basically here with these parentheses, and then the block of code to run. And the for loop, it takes three parameters basically. And the first one is the iterable variable, which is basically represents each item of what we are gonna loop over, or basically the iteration for every iteration we make. And this needs a starting value, so we usually set this to 0. And the next property it takes is the actual condition for the for loop to run. And in this case, we want to loop over this array here in the for loop. And we want to stop running the for loop when we have reached the end of the array. So what we do here is that we set that for as long as our iteration variable is smaller than the array in question, the array in question's length, then we continue to loop through this code block. So when we reach the end of the array, the loop will stop. And the last property we need here in this for loop is an incrementer, which is basically telling the for loop to continue looping. So we basically increment this I variable by 1 for as long as this condition is true, which means that continue firing off the code block. And what we want to fire off here is basically just to console.log out the name of each car. And the way that we do this is that we specify the cars array that we're interested in, and then to access a specific item in an array that we want to log out, we put out, we get the index of this item basically by putting out parentheses like this after the name of the array. And then we specify which item we're interested in, which is our iterable variable here. And the thing we want to print out from this iterable variable, which in this case represents each object in the array for the basically the time it has iterated over the array. And the thing we want to print console.log out here is the name property of this object. So this cars for a loop I.name here, basically what it says here represents here is the first time it iterates over, it represents the first cars object here with the name property, and the next time it iterates over, it represents the Volvo object here with its name property of Volvo. So if we save this and then refresh, we can see that we print out BMW and Volvo. Because it says here that for as long as I is lesser, as long as each iteration count here is shorter or than the cars array, which contains 2 objects, continue to run this code. So it looks at the cars here, sees that it's 2 items long, so it will fire off this code twice, and it will, for each time it iterates over, it will console.log out each car object.name. So that's what is happening here. That's how the for loop works. Another loop that we can use for a specific purpose is the for in loop. And what this loop is used for is to iterate over object properties. So if I, for example, have an object, we can call this person to loop, and set this person object here equal to this person has a name. It might be Christian. He might have an age which might be 30, and he might have we can do like this. We can say that he has a first name called Christian and a last name called Johannesson, and that he has an age of 30. So here we have a person object. And here too, if we want to see which basically do something with each property of this this person object, we can use the for in loop, which basically works the same way as a for loop here would work on an array. So what we do here is that we write for, and this for in loop, it takes basically starting variable, which we can call I in this case too, which will represent each property of the object, and then for each I, and then the keyword in, and then the array or object we're interested in. So person to loop, and then we specify which code to run. So what we say here is that for each property, we could actually call this P, for example, for property, in a person to loop, run this code. So what I simply want to do here is that I want to console.logout P, which is the property. So in this case, it will first log out first name, then last name, and then age. So if I save this and then refresh, we see that we get first name, last name, and then age logged out. And what we can do too, to not just get the keys of the object logged out here, is to actually take the person to loop object like this, and then the same way with the array, specify the actual item that we're interested in, or property in this case. And if we refresh this, we can see that we, instead of getting the keys, we get the values. So we get Christian Johannesson 30 in this way. So that's how you can use the for in loop to loop over objects and their properties. Another loop that we can sometimes might want to use, it's more of an uncommon loop, but you see it sometimes still, is the for off loop. And what this loop does is it basically loops over the properties of an iterable object. So for example, an object that can contain methods such as a string or an array or anything. But for this example, a string can be good to show. And it's a good example for what it can be used for, which many other loops can't be used for. So the way you write a for off loop, you do in this way. You write the keyword for, and then the same way as with for in loop, you write first the property or the property or item or whatever it is of the object, iterable object that you want to iterate over, and then you write the keyword off, and then here we specify the thing we want to iterate over. And if it would be a string in this case, we could over here create a string, const string to loop, and we could just write Christian here. And if we write string to loop here, then we specify that we want to iterate over and fire off something for each basically property or maybe rather iteration of this string here, which will be in this case every character. So it will be C, H, R, ISTIAN. It will fire off the code within this block for all of these different letters. So what we could do here is we can console.logout and then basically just console.logout I. And if we would refresh this, we will see that we console.logout each letter here. So it will basically run over this string here, which is an iterable object, for as many items, or in this case characters, it contains. And what we fire, the code that we make it run in this case is basically a console.log out of each iteration. So that's a for off loop. What we also have, which is more of a common loop, which stands closer in relation to the for loop, is the while loop. And the while loop is also set to run for as long as a condition, for example, for as long as a condition is fulfilled. So if I would, for example, create a function here called run while, and then in here I would create my while loop, then the first thing I would create is a variable, which I create here with the keyword let, since it will take on different values. And I will call this I, and I will set its starting point as 0. And then I will write my while loop under here. So the way you write this is that you write while, and then the condition. And the condition I would set here is as long as I is smaller than 10, then basically fire off this code in here, and I will just basically console.log out I, which in this case is first 0, and then it will, which in this case is 0. And then what I will tell under here then is to increment I by 1 for every time this runs. So the first time it runs, it will print out 0, and then it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until it hits 9, since 9 is smaller than 10. And if I call this function here in a console.log, or not in a console.log, since we're console.logging here, we can actually just call it immediately. So if I call run while here, we should see that it prints out the numbers 0 to 9. So what we can see here is that it starts here 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Since it will stop running this, it will only run this code as long as I, so each iteration is smaller than 10. So it stops at 9. So those are the different loops we are covering in this video. But to end this video, we will go over one extra thing that is quite important, which is the break keyword, which actually allows you to break out of a loop before you have met the condition that you're interested in. And we're going to use this on the most commonly used loop, which is the for loop. So I will create a new array first. So I will create an array here that I will call numbers to loop. And I will just have an array here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I will use a for loop to iterate this array. So I will say here for, and then I will give my starting value for my iterable. And then for as long as I here is shorter than the numbers to loop array, so for as long as I is smaller than numbers to loop dot length, then increase the value of I by 1. So basically run the loop over again, and I set a semicolon here instead of a comma since this is the correct syntax. So what do I want to do then for as long as this condition is true? So, well, basically the code I want to fire off is that I want to basically just console.log out each number here. So if I would follow the same approach as we did before when we created our for loop here, when we looped over the cars array, I would just simply write console.log, and then I would take the numbers to loop array and then console.log here out each item like this. So if I would save this and refresh, then we can see that we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we console.log out each item of the array since we run this code block for as long as our iterable is shorter than the length of the array. But what if we, for example, only wanted to print out or run this block of code for the first 5 values of the array? This is where the break keyword come in and why the for loop can be a preferred option instead of the more commonly nowadays used for each and map methods. And how you would do this is that I would, in this loop here, I would set up an if condition. So I would say if, and then I would say if the numbers, the iterable of the numbers array, so basically the iteration value for each iteration array is equal to 6, for example, then what I want to do is that I want to break out of the loop. So I want to stop running this code as soon as I hit 6. And if I save this and run this again, let's see, numbers, run numbers instead of numbers to loop here. Numbers to loop is equal to 6. Then I want to break out. And what we can see that happens here is that we now only console.log out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because when it runs this code the 6th time, it will see that it hits 6 here at the value. And then it will run this break command and then break out of the loop and basically stop running this code. And this is the way you can basically only iterate over a part of an array if you're only interested in the first maybe couple of values and not the rest, and only want to run code for those values. Then you can use this approach with the for loop and the break command. And that is the last thing we're gonna cover regarding loops, and they are a great way to run code multiple times, even if they can be a little more easy to misinterpret and understand than the more straightforward array iterable methods. But they have their advantages.